Welcome to Dispatches with Hollie McKay. This podcast is proudly brought to you by Humanizing Global Policy, an organization committed to deepening the understanding of how policies impact everyday lives.
3, 2. Hey, welcome back to another dispatch from Hollie McKay. This week, we're going to go south of the U.S. border. First, we're going to talk about an article that Hollie recently wrote about disappeared people in Mexico and the sad situation that's going on there. And then we will finish up with a quick review of what's been going on south of the border since the cartels were declared to be terrorist groups by the United States government. So, Hollie, let's start with this awful and continuing situation of people in Mexico just getting disappeared by the cartels.
It's really shocking and something that doesn't make the news, and it's right next door. So, Mexico, there is, officially around 120,000 people disappeared. However, the people experts that I talk to think that number is probably 200,000 or more. That is an incredible amount of people to have just been disappeared without any recourse. And a large portion of that is typically disappeared by cartels, by organized crime group that function pretty much throughout entire Mexico. So I spent a bit of time in Mexico last month, particularly interviewing mothers whose children have been disappeared, and it's just absolutely heartbreaking because they don't get any government support to get these kids back. Often the times that the police or the local officials are in cohorts with these cartels or these organized crime groups. So they're getting paid off basically to do nothing. And the onus then falls back to the parents to do whatever they can to try to piece together what happened to their child. And this, in some cases, it's been 15 or more years that they've been trying to locate their child without success. And the mothers have had to dedicate their entire lives to this. And oftentimes they're from poor families as it is. And so then they lose their income. And then even when employers find out that so-and-so's child has gone missing, the employers then basically fire them and say, you need to dedicate your life to doing that. We know that you're not going to be able to focus on work, so we have to find somebody else. So it is just absolutely heartbreaking on every level. And then in addition to that, the mothers then get threats because if the cartels know that the parents are out there looking or searching, then they're going to threaten them because they don't want attention to this. They don't want other people or other things uncovered. So it's just all round an absolute atrocity. And several mothers have actually been killed looking for their child. So again, just some of the bravest people I know. And to have to deal with that without any support, without real cooperation from law enforcement, and just because it is so prevalent, nobody cares. I mean, it's just so common for that to happen that it isn't like an anomaly where everybody can give it the attention that it deserves. And so what happens is these parents end up forming these collectives where they get together and they search in national parks and they try to support one another because that is their only recourse in trying to understand what happened to their child and hopefully get some closure. And I apologize. My daughter is next to me and she's decided to be very vocal today.
Oh, it's okay. I love it when she gets vocal. So it sounds very like dystopian Hunger Games type thing, this is so the thing about this that really struck me when reading through the article is how deeply ingrained it has become in the matrix of the Mexican government and the Mexican society and the Mexican culture that it's basically you're told to live with it. And so it's a human rights situation, right? That is
It absolutely is.
yeah.
And it's, to me, it's it's no different to the hostage situation that we hear a lot about in Gaza. We've heard a lot about that. And yet this is on a scale that is 100 times that. And we don't hear about it. And it's right next door. But it's essentially the same thing. You have these, what, in many cases has been designated as terrorist groups, just taking these people in broad daylight in many cases. They'll take teenagers because they see them as being a little bit less suspicious than someone in their 20s doing whatever nefarious activities. Some of it is sex trafficking groups, and that if the woman refuses to do as she's told, basically they'll say, well, we're going to go and kill your family or kill you. And so naturally most people will say kill me over killing my family. Just endlessly horrible things like that, that again, just it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. In one case, and you can read about her in the article, the young woman, the mother, I should say, Daniela, she was about my age, but she had three children who sort of grown up teenagers now. And her middle son was disappeared um, several years ago. He was 16. He was walking out one night and never came home. She believes she knows the person responsible for his disappearance, and he belongs to a local cartel, a very powerful cartel in Mexico City called the Union Cartel. But yet he's still out there, walking free. Nobody's ever apprehended or questioned him about what's happened. And she's just dedicated her life to trying to find her son. And she even was wearing a t-shirt that she'd had printed with his face and like his details on it. And that just it absolutely broke my heart. Just doing everything she can. And she said to me, my two other children, they don't have a mother anymore because I spend my life, and she's a single mom, I spend my life trying to find my other son. And I think we don't always understand the enormity of these things, and just how painful that is as a mother, as a parent, um, to sort of have to endure that, and then to know that there isn't really any help or support system for these people. And this is again happening right on our border. In one case, a young engineer, he disappeared. He was driving to Texas to see friends that were having a baby, and that was in 2011. And at some point, it's sort of an area where the Zeta cartel operates, and she believes that the mom and dad believe that he was kidnapped. And then what happens is the cartels then try to find out if this person can be useful to them. Being a communications engineer, they may have thought he was useful to try to disable some technologies. And there was an incident a few months after his disappearance where Mexican Marines kind of disabled cell towers. But when you're no longer useful to someone, they're not just going to let you go and say, okay, goodbye, go back to your family. It doesn't work like that. And just so many of these people are never found. And as brutal as this sounds, a big reason for that is the cartels will dissolve bodies in acid. Like that is where things are at. That is sort of the inhumanity of what this enterprise has become in Mexico. And yeah, my heart absolutely bleeds for so many families. I mean, to think that this is happening on this scale, the amount of people missing, the amount of lives ruined, the amount of families that are suffering as a result of this is just heartbreaking.
Yeah. So how many people were abducted in Gaza? It's like, was it 250 hostages or
Yeah, it was
more
it
than
was
that?
several. I thought it was maybe 150, but I may be wrong on the
Yeah,
numbers.
yeah, yeah. But I'm just, comparing the scale of that one, which is, I mean, it's not it's a big number, 150, 200.
Absolutely.
Um, but
And a terrible
250,000 is
situation. Yeah.
that's 1,000 times more, you know. That's a lot, it's so much. Even Raven is reacting to that scale, the
Yeah.
disparity of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
It's
it's so it's um and it's clearly cartel driven, and it's clearly the money involved is such that it has driven its way into the government apparatus of that country. Now, and it's horrific, no doubt about it. Let's switch gears and see whether, so the United States recently declared those cartels to be terrorist groups. And the reaction to that, in terms of supporting those types of notions in Central America, has been a bit more favorable to the U.S. Or I don't know if you've seen anything that says that the Mexican government has gotten more aggressive in the aftermath of that, that maybe there can be some headway against these kinds of dystopian outcomes that are occurring in that country. Where are
I did
we?
write about this, and it's also on the Substack. So I think um, the hardline approach that Trump is taking, I think, surprisingly, is very welcomed in Mexico. And I know that Trump is certainly not Mr. Popularity in Mexico, just given his very mean-spirited rhetoric against the Mexican people. But certainly, the way that a lot of these groups operate is terrorizing the lives of many people. And I think what we've seen in the last couple of decades, these groups proliferating, you've seen corruption increase. The previous president, Alamo, he sort of hugs, not bullets approach, and just kind of what nonsense that delivered in the end. And that was really just a gift to the cartels to continue to wreak havoc across the country. And people are fed up with that. And so I think you have to shake things up a little bit. You have to change the way that the approach has been taken, and I think Trump has put a lot of pressure on the relatively new president, Claudia Sheinbaum, who's very popular in Mexico. And I think you're seeing her. There's been, the extradition of a number of these cartel bosses that were wanted in the US. You've seen a lot more arrests happen. So you have seen quite a fair bit of dramatic action over the last couple of months, which really also goes to show you that this could have been done years ago, had the political will been there. That the government does have more power than we might want to think to rein in or at least threaten some of these groups and their enterprises. You've seen a lot of fentanyl labs being shut down. You've seen a lot of operations not stopped, but kind of halted, I think, while these cartels, who are very adaptable, figure out a new approach to continue their operations. But right now, because there is so much more scrutiny on it, they're having to take a pause. So things have shifted, and I think that is a positive step for the people of Mexico. And I want nothing more than to see these groups decimated, not just for the United States and the havoc that they also cause in the United States with their drug trafficking, with their sex trafficking, with their labor trafficking, with their all sorts of terrible things that they do here. But really, ultimately, at the end of the day, it is the Mexican people who suffer as a result of these groups. And I want nothing more than to see them be able to live better lives, because for any people who have had the fortune of spending time in Mexico, it's an incredible place. It really is. And incredibly beautiful people, incredibly hospitable, incredibly fun, spirited people that they're hardworking. They make the most out of life, even when things are troublesome. And so I think that they deserve better than the lives that they've had to, and the suffering that they've had to endure in the last couple of decades as these groups have really taken over.
Yeah. So you think it's constructive then that the fact that the U.S. is now pursuing a much more hardline approach, whether you like the guy or not, what he's really doing is he's executing a U.S. policy that demands more of the other countries in terms of them not putting up with dystopian futures for their people. And it seems to be permeating all the way down the migration chain at least as far as Central America. I don't know if you've seen anything about it permeating all the way down the migration chain into South America. But and you're saying your observation is those people are so desperate for anything to help them get better. They're approving of this stuff, even though domestically in the U.S. it's up for debate.
People want to see change. They want to see um their they want to take their lives back. I mean, at the end of the day, security is fundamental to everyone's existence. So when you don't have that in your life, nothing else matters. So,
Yeah.
something has to change. The strategy, the approach that has been taken in the past is clearly not working. And we can debate all day about, I know there's a huge cohorts of libertarians and other people that just want to see all drugs legalized, etc. And they believe that's a solution. I don't believe that that is the solution. I don't think that, we can look at, say, Oregon as an example of that, where I don't think that really Black's approach actually works. I think what that state is now seen is a terrible rise in addiction and other problems. So I think you could either experiment with that and hope for the best, or you can experiment, and again, it's all an experiment, or you could experiment with this much hardline approach and pushing the Mexican government to do its part. There's talk of targeting cartel groups and a more military aspect of it, which that it may come down to that. The US may have to take a more military approach in that. And I'm someone who's certainly not in favor of war, but in targeting very specific missions that target the perpetrators, I think can send a very important signal. So a lot of it is wait and see, but I think certainly something has to change.
Yeah. So let's finish up. The United States, as you just pointed out, engages in a lot of experiments in terms of its policies with respect to things. But we don't, in my observation, really take into account the effects that it has on the other countries as we essentially enjoy the safety of being able to experiment with these things at a cerebral level and debate them from a fairly safe country, not understand, like 250,000 young people just kind of disappearing and then getting turned into goo when they're no longer useful is not what I would call the best side effect on the planet for thinking about it. What's your closing thought on that?
I mean, I'm always someone that believes in the power of empathy and in yeah, caring about people around us, people that we may not know, and certainly Mexico is our neighbor. Um, and we should care, and it should matter. The lives of other people should matter to us, as a civilization, as a democracy, as all those things. So with that in mind, I think I can't solve it. I can just bring awareness to it. But certainly I would like to see this be a little bit more of a focal point in our sort of foreign policy decision making.
There we go. All right. Well, that I think is a good place to end this one. Not the most pleasant of topics, but then again, exploring world policy and its side effects that it has on real people is, kind of the point of doing some of these dispatches. So thank you, Hollie. And we
And
will
I
talk to you again
guarantee,
soon.
with that, many of these people that are missing are not just Mexican citizens. They're also United States citizens. They're also, so just in that respect, it is a shame that it doesn't get more attention or focus. And I don't like to compare things necessarily, but you compare it to the hostage crisis in Gaza, which gets a quite significant amount of attention. The situation now with the wrongfully deported man from Maryland, where you have a number of Democratic senators flying to El Salvador to try to meet with him. It's still, more than a week into this story, several weeks into this story, it's still headline news on NPR and other channels. It's still a major focus. And again, I stress I understand the importance of the story as someone who believes in the rule of law, who believes in due process, that and that it clearly was an error that the Trump administration has acknowledged. But the amount of attention that's been sort of dedicated to someone who isn't, and necessarily an American citizen, compared to, again, missing people that are. There's certainly no senators sort of flying down to Mexico City to meet with officials to try to pressure them to have certain individuals found or released or something. So, I sort of, just as a journalist, as someone who puts humanitarian issues at the forefront, it's a little bit jarring. Just thinking about what kind of makes headlines and what doesn't.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, well, that's a good follow up point here, in that there have been numerous travel warnings for U.S. citizens traveling to different parts of Mexico over the years, where the cartels are active, and with warnings that, if you go there on vacation, you might wind up dead, or, as you point out, maybe one of the people that gets kidnapped. And I'm not sure what the statistics are, as part of what portion of that 250,000 people that have gone missing are actually U.S. citizens that just got caught in the wrong place at the wrong time in the middle of Mexico.
Yeah. Well, just a lot of Mexicans, and there are many Mexicans who are also Americans, just because, for
They count.
many different reasons, being a neighbor. So, um, yeah, there's certainly a good chunk.
Yeah. Well, that means it hits more than just the citizens of another country, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, I like to think that we're all in this together, but that's not necessarily the way some other people see it. Anyway, Holly, I will close it out again, unless you got something else that pops into your mind, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Dennis. Appreciate